Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by Compliance Week and Aravo. I'm Aaron Nicodemus with Compliance Week, and I'll be your host. Today's webcast is Debunking the Myths of AI and ML in Third-Party Risk Technology. Before we hear from our presenters, let me review the agenda. We're scheduled to go for 1 hour. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so please don't be shy. You can ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll pose them to our guests at the end of their presentation. After the Q&A, I'll wrap up the webcast. This webcast will offer CPE credit for all attendees. Please be sure you are using either Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser, and you have disabled your pop-up blockers in order to ensure access to them. Once I have signed off and the webcast is completely over, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have trouble doing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcasts@complianceweek.com. Once again, to ensure receipt of your CPE credit, please be sure you are using Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser. If you've missed anything, I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast, so stay tuned. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. There you will also find the feedback form for the webcast. We welcome your thoughts, as we are always looking to improve your experience. If you wish to increase the slide size, you can hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the top right of your screen. And lastly, the Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. All right, let me welcome today's speakers. It is my pleasure to introduce Eric Hensley, who is responsible for the technical delivery of Aravo's product offerings, including engineering, QA, and hosting operations. He has over 15 years experience in the development and delivery of enterprise SaaS offerings with a special focus on supply chain management and intelligence solutions. I'd also like to welcome Kimberly Allen. Kimberly has more than a decade of executive leadership experience in the governance, risk, and compliance space, building brand recognition, thought leadership, and revenue accelerating marketing programs. Companies include Thomson Reuters, SAI Global, Global Association of Risk Professionals, Practical Law Company, and Complement. We also have Michael Rasmussen, an internationally recognized pundit on governance, risk management, and compliance, with specific expertise on the topics of enterprise GRC, technology, corporate compliance, and policy management. With 25 years experience, Michael helps organizations improve GRC processes, design and implement GRC architecture, and select technologies that are effective, efficient, and agile. It's great to have you all with us. With that, I will turn it over to Kimberly to get us started.
Hi, thanks very much, Aaron. Really appreciate the introduction. And firstly, thanks to everyone for joining us today. I see there's lots of you on the call, so good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be in the world. We certainly always enjoy your participation, so do feel free to ask questions over the course of the webinar, and I'll make sure that both Michael and Eric get those today. So today's conversation is certainly very topical, and I'm really delighted to be joined by both Michael and Eric, who both bring a very rich but slightly different perspective to the conversation today. So Eric is a technologist who is building this technology, and Michael as a GRC analyst who helps bring insights into the kinds of requirements organizations have when it comes to AI and how it can improve their GRC outcomes, as well as also, the range of tools that can support them. So just in terms of today's agenda, just to go into it a little bit deeper, we're going to kick off with just the basics of what AI is. We'll talk about it a little more in the context of digital transformation and just look at some industry surveys that have taken place recently in terms of AI adoption and digital transformation. We'll then learn about some of the real use cases for AI in managing third-party risk in particular. We'll work at untangling some of the hype from the truth, and we'll also finish on what you should be considering when evaluating AI technologies as well. So I have to start with this, Eric. So if you believe a lot of the marketing hype that people like me might spin up, AI is either going to free us from having to do any tedious work and allow us to focus on providing strategic value to the business, or my favorite outcome, sitting on the beach drinking cocktails and leaving machines to do all the work. Or if you're guided by Hollywood, AI is going to take over the world and bring on the apocalypse. So Eric, which is it, and what is AI?
Thanks, Kimberly. AI, I mean, is this sort of blanket term that represents, a lot of different sort of intelligence-oriented technologies. It's really sort of evolved over the last decade or so. In general, it can refer to all sorts of different technologies, expert systems, natural language processing. These days, most people who use the term AI are talking about machine learning of one form or another. I mean, everybody sort of remembers IBM Watson being on Jeopardy back at the beginning of the decade. That was an early application of machine learning, and that was very impressive. Everybody sort of sat up and took notice. Your training up of self-driving cars, is a manifestation of machine learning. And so when I look at the technology landscape out there, AI is usually neural network-based machine learning, sometimes deep learning, which is just sort of a different kind of neural network that's a little bit easier to train and have responses that you expect. But mostly we're talking about machine learning and a series of statistical methods that represent that.
Great. So just to move along, I mean, one of the things that we find with emerging technology is that on paper, they can seem like a great proposition. But then reality kind of steps in the way, and actually applying them to practical use cases can become a hurdle in and of itself. But AI is starting to come into its own. We're seeing capabilities advancing. It's becoming easier to develop and implement AI applications. But more importantly, companies are now starting to see tangible benefits from adoption. So just looking at a couple of recent surveys that sort of accentuate the adoption of AI, particularly in digital transformation. So a recent survey from Deloitte regarding companies' sentiments and practices found that across executives, 73% believe AI is very or critically important to their business today. 64% said AI technologies enable them to establish a lead over their competitors, and 74% agree that AI will be integrated into all enterprise applications within 3 years. And then when we bring COVID-19 into the equation, it's likely that this adoption is only going to speed up. So one of the things that COVID-19 has really thrust into the spotlight is this urgent need to drive digital transformation across the enterprise to really power through this pandemic. And you've probably seen instances of your own organizations so far today. Looking at Gartner's 2020 Board of Directors survey, 69% of respondents stated that they are accelerating digital business initiatives in the wake of COVID-19. So that really brings us to today's conversation. What we're hearing from surveys like this is that almost 3/4 of organizations believe that AI will be integrated into all enterprise applications within 3 years. And this, of course, includes GRC applications, and more specifically for today's conversation, third-party GRC. So, Michael, Why is GRC, and in particular third-party risk management, such a good candidate for AI?
Thank you, Kimberly. I mean, great question, but it's multifaceted. I mean, AI is a good candidate for governance, risk, and compliance processes, specifically because it's going to enable organizations to be more efficient, effective, and agile. Efficient is around the use of human capital and financial capital resources. I've talked to firms that it takes 200 hours to build a compliance report for the board of directors. I've talked to other firms where they're finding that 80% of their compliance staff is nothing more than document reconcilers trying to manage hundreds of thousands of document spreadsheets and emails. I mean, and artificial intelligence enables us to be more efficient in our use of time. In fact, one company I was talking to, a life sciences company in the United Kingdom, told me that they told me that they found that artificial intelligence was actually, much more rapid than what humans can digest as far as taking in documents like regulations and things and processing them, but also was also 20% more accurate. And so efficiency is one aspect. The other aspect is effectiveness, that accuracy, more complete, thorough, being able to map and see relationships of things and the overall analytics. And then, of course, more agile and being able to predict outcomes in the future and being able to enhance operational resiliency and agility. I mean, to me, that's why artificial intelligence is a good candidate for GRC. But on the flip side, I would say that, it's not the panacea, where it is perfect. To me, right now, as I cover vendors in this space, every vendor, out there seems to promote artificial intelligence. And if they have some, simple logic in a workflow, they call it artificial intelligence. So there's a lot of hype out there. The other thing is it's a tool that still needs humans to be behind the tool. If the old way of doing things was with a screwdriver to screw the screw into the wall, artificial intelligence to me is that cordless drill. But you just can't press the button and just let it go full force. You need to feel when that screw needs to stop into the wall. It requires some human control and things at this point, at least artificial intelligence, but it is a very useful tool.
Thanks, Michael. Eric, do you have anything to add to that? I mean, dealing with the vast amounts of data in sort of our GRC applications and third-party risk sort of must be another reason that, AI is really beginning to make sense here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the tool sets for AI have been becoming, I would say, more accessible over the last few years as the underlying neural networks for natural language processing and multi-layer ones for prediction become sort of more off the shelf. The interesting part about GRC data is that, there's sort of mixed adoption of standards out there in GRC and third-party risk and compliance land. And that makes it hard to use the older AI methodologies where you would get together an enormous amount of sort of off-the-shelf or standardized data and train up, usable by everyone, machine learning appliances to make decisions and do automation. In GRC and third-party risk land, there's a lot of, programs out there that vary by industry or vary by risk domain. And there's lots of data, but the data varies quite a bit, both from domain to domain and from company to company. And so making the tools more versatile in their ability to use more appropriate data sets as opposed to sort of one master or a few master data sets like we saw in the early days of AI and machine learning earlier in the decade, is really making it more applicable sort of just now.
Great, thanks, Eric. So, Michael, I mean, you're out there talking to participants in the industry, every day. How have you seen this requirement sort of evolve over time?
Well, there's a whole history of what I call GRC 1.0 to 5.0, and we're currently in that transition from 4.0 to 5.0. GRC 1.0 is that technology that came out of 2002 to 2007. It was predominantly focused a lot on Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. It's what I call the SOX captivity of GRC. GRC 2.0 is that period of 2007 to 2012 where we're talking about enterprise GRC. and greater focus really on the back office and what we traditionally call the second and third lines of functions of audit, risk, and compliance. Then GRC 3.0 was about GRC architecture, that there's not one technology that's going to do everything governance, risk, and compliance. And it makes a lot of sense to build best of breed systems that can still integrate and provide for enterprise risk reporting. But you might very well have a third-party risk system that is separate from your enterprise risk management system. And it makes a lot of sense when you're interacting and granting hundreds of thousands of different suppliers and vendors access to the system. And so the GRC 3.0 was GRC architecture, and how do we build in best of breed systems and an overall architecture for technology and information for governance, risk, and compliance. We're currently in the area of GRC 4.0, which I call Agile GRC. And this whole period is, about the modern user experience, being able to engage not just the back office functions, those second and third line functions on risk and compliance, but also the front office, where risk and compliance decisions are being made every day. And not just the front office within your organization, but within third parties. I'm talking to one European bank that's looking at having every individual within their data center, and most of those individuals in their data center are not employees. They are outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, and they're looking at every individual to go through the same policies and training on GDPR as employees do. And so it's how do the GRC 4.0 is that Agile GRC. It's about the modern user engaging interface, no-code solutions that have a lower total cost of ownership, and can easily engage the front office as well as the back office. And we're moving towards what I call GRC 5.0, which is cognitive GRC. And that's where you see artificial intelligence become mainstream. And right now we're seeing early adoption of that, and we'll get into that in the next few minutes as we go through some of your other questions. But right now we have early adopter stage, but mainstream adoption for a lot of these artificial intelligence technologies are going to come in the next couple of years.
Sounds like in the next 3 years if the surveys, are correct there. So thanks, Michael and Eric. Just moving on to Eric, if you were going to sort of look broadly speaking at the general applications and use cases for AI, what are these?
Yeah, absolutely. These are very common uses across sort of machine learning oriented AI. And a couple of them have been use cases for all forms of AI for many years. But machine learning and the more cognitive oriented AI that we have now really gets us into all three of these. Intelligence is the easy one that everybody thinks of, right? I need to make a decision, and decisions have been made in the past, and I have trained up some piece of technology, one of these modern AIs, in order to help me make that decision. Based on larger amounts of data than either I could realize manually, or I could easily create, one of the, older-fashioned analytical risk or decision models. Because either you have thousands of inputs, or those inputs change in sort of unpredictable ways. So the sort of big deal about machine learning, particularly your deep neural networks, is that they allow you to take all of this data and sort of in an automated fashion, figure out which of the inputs are important for the decisions that you're making. And thus you can have intelligence, right? Help me make a correct decision based on, all of the data that I have about good and bad decisions that have been made in the past. And the other two flow very naturally from that, which is why they're in this order. Prediction, if you have a machine that can help you make intelligent decisions based on all this data and based on decisions made in the past, then you can have those machines consistently looking at your input data as they change, more consistently than with humans, right? Which is, as we know, very sort of effort intensive in order to keep an eye on the state of all of your sort of risk inputs or compliance inputs or governance as it changes in order to change your decisions. Easier to have machines do that, particularly if they have a sense of good decision making. That's prediction, right? I'm using the same sort of trained automation system that I built for the first one, their intelligence, and it's just always looking at all of my inputs as they change, and it's letting me know when my decision should also change based on those inputs. So that one's simple and easy to understand. And then automation comes right out of those two. right? Once you have spent enough time looking at, the outputs of these AI systems for your intelligence and, building up trust in their, ability to predict outcomes, then you can start to turn some of that decision making and some of those actions that you take based on those decisions over to these, now trusted or well-trained, or at least, effective in your eyes. And it's always in your eyes. Humans have to take a look at these things and decide, right? But effective in your eyes, train machine learning systems and thus gain huge automation benefits.
Great, thanks, Eric. Michael, is there sort of any real use cases against these that you can think of that you've encountered in your conversations in the market?
Definitely. I mean, there's use cases to be able to, use robotic process automation and themes to be able to look at transactions and be able to even stop a transaction to go into a third party, like a payment in themes that might be to somebody that might be on a politically exposed persons list. And from that perspective, I'm seeing a lot of use of things like with natural language processing to be able to take in the organization's, policies and then compare those to vendors or suppliers' policies. It might be an IT security policy, and the corporation might have a strong password policy, and then analyzing the length of password, complexity of password, frequency of change of password, and those elements of the policy by the machine reading that policy, compare it to a vendor's or supplier's policy, and note the differences that on their policies compared to your policies. And so we're seeing things like that. And being able to do things like a lot of regulatory change management. I'm seeing a lot of use for natural language processing, artificial intelligence, things like horizon scanning to be able to look at, where things are headed. But those are some. Kimberly, are you there?
I am, sorry, I had myself on mute. I was just sort of diving into some of the practical applications in third-party risk management. For instance, if we look at intelligence, that's kind of supporting a decision-making process. For instance, the third party may have completed an ABAC, an anti-bribery corruption assessment, and have been screened against, say, the US Consolidated Screening List. But when reviewing the assessment and search results, the risk expert may be given an AI-generated yes-no recommendation along with a level of decision-making content, say between 0 and 100% confidence, and evaluation of the model quality, again, from 0 to 100%. So the risk expert still makes the ultimate decision, and the machine learning, continues to learn from that decision, so it continues to improve the model and its confidence as well. So that's just sort of one example of sort of the application of intelligence in third-party risk management here. But I'm going to move along now to automation, and we're going to have a little bit of a deeper dive into this. And Eric, I'll ask you to go through the various automation stages.
Right, absolutely happy to. Aravo is we're an automation company, right, by which we automate a variety of sort of business use cases, mostly focused on third-party risk and compliance management, but others as well. And so we think of the sort of world of software in terms of automation, because we've been working on automation of these things for so long. And we have this taxonomy of levels of automation, wherein you put more and more intelligence into your system so that it can make decisions for you, and thus get automation benefit. And as you see, we have sort of these 4 levels. 0, just being data gathering, go out and get the information that you need in order to make decisions, and then just, very naively make decisions based on that data. And that's number 1 there, which is business rules. And you can see the line there, because 0 isn't really a level of automation. It's just sort of a precursor. If you don't have the right information, you can't make these decisions. And if you can't make these decisions, then you can't get any automation benefits. But business rules conditionality, a rule-based framework, maybe even a dynamic rule-based framework, wherein your rule system reacts a little bit based on your data inputs. That's the first level of automation, right? You get an analyst to take a look at data inputs, and you say, if I have a SOC 2 for my infrastructure providers, and it's up to date, and I've given it a reasonable review by the first line of defense, then go ahead and automatically approve that, because that's what our policies say, and we're just going to build that. That's level one. You've seen that in a lot of systems for a long time. Level two, your analytical system. You're starting to get into expert systems here, which traditionally was called a form of AI by a lot of people, right? This is where you build an analytical model, an expert system, whereby it's looking for you injected your analysis with, a little bit of, admittedly fixed, but still in there, cognitive ability insofar as it can make decisions dynamically based on analysis of data, often using, baseline or rote statistical methods, right? Let's take aggregates over groups of data, or automatically break data down into sub-aggregates and make decisions based on that. But, a lot of people will be familiar with, running analytics in either desktop analytics systems or in the big enterprise ones, making decisions based on that, and then just having an automation to make decisions based on that. That's level two, evaluating your risk, building a risk model, right? That takes, a dozen or 20 or 30 inputs, combines them using some mathematical model, and then makes decisions on it. Analytical evaluation. This you find in a lot of larger systems and more mature ones, and you find more mature companies using analytical evaluation. A lot of companies use it for decision making, but more mature companies use it for automation. And then level three, your AI or machine learning oriented automation. The idea with this is that it becomes difficult to do number two there, and particularly number one, when the number of data inputs either becomes really large, or the amount of data, the volume that's coming in, the rate, becomes really high. The first happens if you're just, as we know, our risk and compliance programs become more and more complicated over time. We gather more and more data inputs. Our assessments of our third parties get longer and longer. Everybody knows that they never seem to get shorter, although we often try to do so at Aravo, just to make everybody's life easier. But they never seem to get shorter. And then there are data inputs from, sort of data monitoring sources, third-party data about, things that are happening in the world, data from regulatory sources. That's the volume of data. These two things come in together to create enormous numbers of data inputs. And it's difficult to make automation models based on very, very large numbers of data inputs, high data rates, because it's difficult to decide what's important. And that's where these sort of deep neural networks and machine learning come in, right? You take all of that data, you use it to make decisions yourself over some period of time, and then you use all of those decisions with that input data to train your machine learning and allow it in an automated fashion to figure out what the important inputs are. And then you can sort of get machine learning based automation for free if you've been making good decisions based on your data inputs over some period of time.
Great, thank you, Eric. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that, Michael? I think that sort of sets out automation stages quite well, and probably maps quite well to some of the maturity journeys that you've seen in the market as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, to me, when we look at the third-party GRC maturity model that I worked on with Aravo, it's the artificial intelligence really comes in at the stages 4 and 5, where it's integrated and then agile. And that's really what we're trying to aim here for when we look at these automation stages, is greater agility in the organization, agility in our use of human and financial capital resources, agility in keeping up with the change and the complexity of data and relationships, and be able to make intelligent decisions about it.
Great, thank you. And we thought now it might be nice just to get the audience a little bit more involved and have an audience poll. So we're going to ask you about your own adoption of AI in your GRC programs. You should be seeing a poll up on your screens now. So is AI already an essential capability embedded in your GRC technology? That's option 1. Option B, it's not embedded yet, but it is on the roadmap of what we're looking for. C, we're not sure yet. We really need to understand more about practical GRC use cases and applications. Or D, it's not a consideration at all for our GRC programs for the foreseeable future. Just give you a few more moments of seeing some of the responses come in. Okay, are we able to share those results with the audience? So it looks like most of the audience today, we've got 38% who are indicating that it's not embedded yet, but it is on the roadmap of what they're looking for. Just slightly more at 41%. Not sure, really need to understand more about practical GRC use cases and applications. A few of you, just 8%, it's not really a consideration. And then just shy of 14% of you already have it embedded in your GRC technology. Michael, are these results any surprise to you?
No, I mean, it seems pretty much, par for the course right now from what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at these results because they kind of map quite well if you look at the sort of the bell curve of maturity across the industry in terms of where the market is from the ad hoc and fragmented stages very early on in their third-party risk management maturity of their programs through to the more integrated and agile, the sort of macro bell curve that we're seeing here as well. So which takes us to some of the myths versus the realities. Michael, take us through some of the hype that you encounter out there in the market that you hear.
I mean, one thing is, just vendor hyperbole. I mean, as I was stating a few minutes ago, the thing that I'm encountering all the time is that, everybody's using this as a marketing message. And so if somebody puts some type of, logic or business rule into a workflow, they're touting it as artificial intelligence. And it's not really, any type of machine learning or predictive analytics or natural language processing things that we talked about. So there's a lot of marketing hype. The other, myth is, this isn't going to be fully automated. It requires human interaction in things. I think we actually run the risk of relying too much on artificial intelligence. Now, don't get me wrong. I am a fan for artificial intelligence. I believe this is where things are going. But, with technology, there's also risks. And so one of those risks is, we dumb things down too much. Where the machine comes up with its analysis, and humans tend to be lazy, and they say, oh yeah, that looks right, and they don't really think for themselves and say, well, that really isn't categorized properly. Something just doesn't seem to be right here. Right now, at least at this stage of artificial intelligence, there should be some human governance to artificial intelligence to look at the results. And not just, hit the button for accepting them and moving on. We should interpret it to make sure that the machine came up with the right answer. And to me, that's some of the myth versus reality that we need to look at right now.
Thanks, Michael. Eric, from a technologist's point of view, what are some of the most frustrating misconceptions you come across?
Let's see. Over on, adding on to what Michael said there, absolutely that. But the biggest issue that I come across amongst people who actually have machine learning solutions or are at least working on them is a thing about data. And I mentioned this a little bit at the beginning. as I started to talk to our prospects and customers about their experiences with either, their internal implementations of machine learning-based AI or other vendors that they had, and they all had this big, frustration that was very common, which was, vendors are coming to me with one-size-fits-all solutions. And I understand, because people know this, right? I understand that you have to train these systems with some data, and they're coming to me with these solutions, and I don't know how they've trained them. I don't know how they're going about making these decisions. I'm seeing a decision here that's telling me that a supplier is risky, or it's telling me that, one of my internal controls needs to be updated, and I have no idea how it's making that decision, and so how am I supposed to go about trusting that? And then also, I have very little oversight into that. Do I allow that to go forward? Like, can I review how confident these systems are? So this I heard over and over and over and over again from our existing customers, right? Many of them are very mature in their use of all of these technologies and have, very mature programs. And so, the big thing is, like Michael was saying, if you're going to drive adoption of this sort of thing, particularly in this market, where programs vary between verticals and companies, and where masses of standardized data just aren't available over there, you have to let people use their own data in order to create decision-making systems, and then you need to let them evaluate how these decision-making systems are doing over some period of time in order to build trust. Because these off-the-shelf solutions, I don't think they're going to do it in this particular space because of just variations between companies, programs, verticals, etc. A lack of overall standardization.
Great, thank you, Eric. So moving on to some of the things that AI is not. So the first there, it's not a replacement for defining a process. What do we mean by that? Michael?
Is that
to me, you have to define your processes that artificial intelligence can automate. I mean, to me, as I stated a bit ago, artificial intelligence is like moving from that, handheld, manual screwdriver to, a cordless screwdriver. I mean, there's great efficiency and effectiveness and agility that can be gained in your current processes, but it doesn't just replace those processes. I mean, you might have a regulatory change management process, and, artificial intelligence can help you map a regulatory change and go through regulations and understand what policies need to be updated, very rapidly, but you still have the different stages of that process. And then, you need to understand what needs to change in the organization and as a result of those changes. I mean, so artificial intelligence, you just don't dump in and it replaces the process. It really enables the process.
Great, thank you. It's also not a solution for bad past decisions. How would you categorize that, Eric?
Well, as I mentioned on the last slide, there aren't very many sort of one-size-fits-all trained appliances for making these decisions because people's programs vary. There are there's a few very standardized programs out there along the lines of, like SIG for InfoSec, but even those don't have really wide adoption. And so if you have an internal process and, your assessment of the risks in your internal process for, your internal risk or against your suppliers has been mediocre, or particularly if you've been gathering a lot of data and then your assessors have been assessing based on almost none of it, maybe they're just looking at country or something like that, an AI system is going to learn that. And it's going to immediately show up in your trained models that all of the decision making has been placed on one piece or a handful of data elements, and you're going to know immediately that you had sort of a bad process. That can be a benefit if you're looking to improve your process, but people find that counterintuitive, and so I like to bring it up.
So it's not going to miraculously fix bad decisions. And we've heard a lot around data today. It's not going to be a workaround for bad data as well.
Yeah, I mean, the old term, garbage in, garbage out.
It seems to be even more exacerbated when you bring something like AI into the equation. And finally, is AI superior to humans?
It's not the methodologies that we have now. Machine learning is not. It doesn't have the current AI methodologies don't have any concept of the meaning of information. They don't have cognition in any sort of reasonable way. If you went to a cognitive scientist and asked them, they're statistical methodologies that can extract, the importance of data as it goes into, decision making based on those data, and it's very good at that. But it would be a long road to hoe to say in any way, shape, or form that's superior to humans, and that's very related to those first three there. Those first three, all of those require actual human cognition. And if your human cognition is poor, then your machine learning based automation is going to be poor. And that right there is kind of good for me. We all know about self-driving cars, for example, for machine learning, and sort of the difficulty that self-driving car companies are having with it. And that's for exactly these reasons, right? There's nearly an infinitude of data inputs that go into it, and you just have to learn over time human decisions that humans make. They can't figure it out themselves because there's kind of no they there.
Yeah, and what happens when the car's got to make the decision? Do I kill the pedestrian or do I kill the driver? Somebody's going to get hurt.
Right, and it's going to be based on sort of whatever decisions happened beforehand, and not sort of any internal conception of ethics or morality, because those conceptions can't exist in the current system.
A very good analogy. So really thinking about AI and third-party risk, and a lot of the people who have joined us on the call today from the survey results, poll results, they're going to be starting to look at AI capabilities and building them in to their roadmap. So I'm going to ask Michael, what is some of the advice that you'd give to anyone evaluating technologies today for AI capabilities?
I would have them clearly define what they mean by artificial intelligence, what the use cases are, and particularly the thing I would ask for would be what client references do they have? If I'm an organization looking at technology, I don't want to be the guinea pig to test this stuff out. That's just my mentality. Maybe you on the phone, maybe you're one of those forward-thinking, aggressive risk-taking organizations. I'm all for artificial intelligence, but I want it to be proven if I'm going to implement it in my environment. And so from that perspective, what are the use cases and client references that can speak to the value and use and accuracy of it?
Thank you, Michael. Eric, what kind of advice would you be giving those on the line today starting to evaluate technology?
Michael is exactly right. He's got it nailed there, right? What exactly is your technology that we are, calling AI here? What is it for? What does it do? Who's using it? And what is it supposed to do? Are you telling me it's a magic solution that's been mysteriously trained up with data that I've never heard of that's going to magically solve my problem? Or is it a tool, like Michael says it is, right? That's better than a hammer, that's going to allow me to, improve my efficiency in decision making and improve my efficiency in, sort of task automation based on all of the information decision making I've already made. Look for someone who can describe to you exactly how their system works in a way that you can understand, because this AI and machine learning stuff, it's not that complicated, and there's a heck of a lot of people trying to make it so because their solutions aren't very compelling, I find out there.
Thank you. And how important is it to look at things like your own program maturity as you start to look at these technologies? Michael?
From that perspective, when I'm going to look at my overall program maturity and break down my processes, I'm going to want to look at, where am I spending a lot of time and resources where artificial intelligence can help me automate? If artificial intelligence can comb through transactions much faster, or compare policies of a third party to my policy and things like that much faster, those are key areas where I would look to leverage artificial intelligence today, is where I'm having the most burden.
Great, thank you. So that really brings us to the close of our conversation today, which leaves us some time for questions from the audience, and we've had some coming in. So I'm going to ask Aaron to read us some of the questions that have come in from the audience.
Great, thanks, Kimberly. That was great. Let me just take a little bit of time to talk about how you can get a copy of the slides, and then I'll go into some questions. If you'd like a copy of the slides that were just presented, you can download the menu on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Now we can move on to the Q&A. I will read these questions from the audience. Let's see. How much expertise required for AI to be implemented, and what's the difference with RPA?
Want me to take that one? I'd be happy to.
Sure.
Or some. Okay. How much expertise is required for AI to be implemented? You don't necessarily need much expertise in AI, certainly, if you have a good system. You have to have a sense of what you want your AI to do, right? Like, do I have programs that I want to be more efficient, more automated, more accurate? If you've got nailed down some reasonable sort of automation or intelligence use cases or prediction at a high level, then there are systems out there that have AI solutions that can help with that. And so no one really needs to be an expert at AI anymore, any more than like people needed to be an expert at, making business rules, like if you're a process person, where can I build some business rules there? If you have sort of that, if you're thinking about your processes in that way, and there's places in there where you can't really build business rules because people are making complex decisions, but nevertheless, you'd like to, improve them in one of those 3 use cases that we mentioned at the beginning, then it's totally doable. There are systems out there that'll do it. RPA, robotic process automation, is a different kind of automation system that sometimes uses AI to help with decision making, but robotic process automation is an automation system that pretends to be a user. It's a kind of sort of web or systems automation that's been around for a while, but it sort of pretends to be a user, and it's a way of automating systems that don't otherwise have sort of easy to use automation APIs or methodologies. And so RPA systems pretend to be a user. They act in your often legacy systems, and those systems might use AI to sort of read data out of those legacy systems and make decisions, and then execute those decisions in your legacy systems. And so RPA is an automation toolkit that might use this kind of AI and machine learning that we've been talking about all day today as a decision point, or not. It might just use business rules, or it might have an analytical engine, or it might do no decision making. It might just go through a series of predefined steps.
Okay, thanks. Next question is, what is the full form of GRC?
I'll take that one. I mean, from my perspective, governance, risk, and compliance is something organizations have always done, whether they call it GRC, ERM, ABC, XYZ, or they don't even have a name for it. And so governance, risk, and compliance are activities of the organization. And from that perspective, we might have to talk about GRC technology, but GRC is more about strategy and process and activities of the organization, and not technology. Technology enables GRC and makes it more efficient, effective, and agile. The formal definition of GRC is that GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives, that's the governance function, while addressing uncertainty, that's risk management, and act with integrity, that's compliance. So GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity. Now, in the context of today's presentation on third-party GRC, to me, I take that definition from OSEG from the GRC capability model and apply it to third-party risk. that, third-party governance, risk, and compliance is that capability to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and active integrity in and across our third-party relationships. But, GRC is more than technology. It's about strategy and process. It's something everybody does, whether they use the acronym or not. And the definition of GRC found in the OSEG GRC capability model is that GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives while addressing uncertainty and act with integrity.
Great, thank you. Here's a question. Might AI and machine learning cure the specter that arises when SaaS solutions are on offer, gaming by a third party that is required for a services agreement to comply with a certain GRC-based internal controls?
Let's see. It might. I'm doing a little bit of interpretation of the question here. I think this question means that you have internal security. You have controls that are internal, and someone wants to use a SaaS solution and outsource to a SaaS solution some sort of processing, right? And you're having a hard time applying your internal controls to that external system, and so you're sort of getting gamed as a whole in your process. The AI and ML as a kind of analysis could certainly show problems like that in your assessment process. But in my mind, that's more just an issue of assessment of your third-party risk and compliance programs, right? Are you applying all of your controls to a sort of best of breed and, ideally mostly automated third-party risk and compliance program, i.e., have you extended GRC to your third parties there? AI and ML can certainly help with that, but I would start with just, take a look at the maturity of your third-party process and work on extending your internal GRC program to it.
Great. Okay. Here's another. How many third parties should a company have before using such a system?
Such a system, in this case, and presumably a system with a high degree of automation. This is a maturity question, really. The number of third parties matters less than the maturity of your overall program and sort of the risk of your third parties. If you're dependent on your third party ecosystem, and most companies are if they're over a certain size, then having a good program with a lot of automation in it, it takes a lot of risk out of your business. And I mean, we have lots of customers with, dozens to hundreds of third parties who have very mature programs just because they're heavily dependent on the third parties. I mean, they're not manufacturing companies with, hundreds of thousands of suppliers, but, nevertheless, their suppliers are usually doing critical infosec processing, and infosec and data privacy stuff is very critical, even though they might have, 15 third parties who are doing that for them. Nevertheless, they're at risk because they're doing all the data processing. And so it's more about maturity than number of third parties.
Okay, good. How can internal auditors use AI?
Michael, you want to do that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot with going through a lot of transactions and being able to evaluate transactions in the ERP systems. That's definitely one aspect of it. I mean, if auditors need to compare documents and things like policies of the organization to policies of a vendor or supplier to ensure that they match and there's not specific gaps in controls and things, I mean, there's another use case.
Okay, good. I've got two more questions, and I'm going to ask them both, and then we'll wrap up the session. How do we ensure that AI solutions are 100% effective?
Well, I'll state that right now humans aren't 100% effective. I mean, there's going to be some level of error, I think, no matter what we have. I mean, whether it's artificial intelligence or human. But I did reference, when I was talking to that one pharmaceutical company in the United Kingdom, that they found that artificial intelligence was 20% more accurate than humans in reading regulations and applying them. But it doesn't mean that's 100% accurate. It just means that it's more accurate than humans.
Okay, fair enough. All right, our last question. What is the maintenance and upkeep required to keep an AI solution running, current, and accurate?
Okay, that's a good question. Good AI and ML systems learn from your existing processes. And usually, if they've been well designed in an entirely transparent way, if you're an IT guy and you're running, AI and ML infrastructure internally, that's a totally different question, right? But if we're talking about, solutions that, business people are using in order to affect better decision making, better automation, then well-designed systems should be nearly transparent. Like we've been saying this morning, it's more important that you have, reasonable processes. You've identified, areas for, intelligence or prediction or automation in your processes that are, sort of good fits for AI, and that you were already sort of making good decisions in a reasonable program before that. If all those are in place, your AI solutions will just start to help over a period of time without you doing anything if you have a reasonably designed solution. If someone's coming to you and saying, I have AI for you, but you have to do a lot of stuff in order to make it work, that's someone who hasn't thought enough about how they're using AI.
Okay, thank you. I want to thank everyone who participated and listened in, and I want to thank our speakers today, Eric Hensley, Kimberly Allen, and Michael Rasmussen. And I'd like to give a special thanks to Aravo for making this webcast possible. Once again, to obtain your CPE credit for this presentation, please disable your pop-up blockers in order to access the exam. The webcast will close automatically, and the final examination will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcasts with an S at complianceweek.com. This webcast has been recorded and will be available later today to Compliance Week members on our website under the Webcast tab, which also contains a library of additional CPE webcasts. If you would like to learn more about becoming a member, please contact us at info@complianceweek.com. Some of you may know that Compliance Week recently lowered our membership pricing from $1,199 to $399 in order to build a large community of practitioners. As a full member, you get access to tools and resources, discounts to conferences, and full access to our website. For today only, we invite you to use the code WEBCAST365, all caps, to receive a membership for just $1 a day. Check out the complianceweek.com/membership to learn more. This concludes our webcast. Thank you everyone again for joining us, and goodbye.